So I think I'm going to take a slightly different tack and try to highlight some other aspects of cooperatives from the perspective of housing cooperatives that I work with. So I'm interested, first of all, to find out from folks here whether anyone does live or has lived in a housing cooperative. A good number. Were any of those student housing cooperatives? Okay. And so that would be a non-student housing cooperative.
I grew up in the Amalgamated Housing Co-op, which is the nation's first housing co-op in the Bronx.
Yeah, and about how many units, do you remember?
1,500.
1,500, right. So that's the size of some Vermont towns, right? And then, okay, and so the folks who've been in student co-ops, I'm just interested to hear from people, what were some of the reasons that you wanted that living experience, that you chose to live there?
It's cheap.
Cheap?
Affordable.
Community?
Yeah.
Yep. Anything else?
I would say what's interesting about it is, I kind of found it through people that I knew, and then there's all these things you can learn about how it works as you experience it more. I found that over time that it just kind of, the logic of it expands and expands the more you see it work.
Okay, thanks. And then how many people here own a home or have owned a home? A lot of folks. Would anyone care to say what some of the things are that you value about owning your home individually?
Autonomy, being able to control. I can dig my garden when I want to.
Is it painted purple? Is your living room painted purple or something?
I could if I wanted.
That's right. Anything else? Other aspects of ownership people value?
Accumulation of equity.
I'm sorry?
Equity.
Equity. Yep. Okay. So thank you for all of that. I think you've named the reasons that, most of the reasons that people live in the housing cooperatives that I work with. I'm not going to speak about housing cooperatives as a whole sector because I'm not really such an expert on that. I know so what Avram was talking about is co-ops that were financed by unions. That's certainly a big chunk of co-ops historically in the U.S. There are also, I don't know if anyone else who's lived in New York City is familiar with some extremely expensive co-ops that would be sort of at the other end of the spectrum.
The kind of co-op that the Amalgamated is what's called a limited equity co-op. Other co-ops are really basically condos,
yep.
Where they sell for whatever the real estate market will. I don't think of them as co-ops.
As co-ops, yeah. So they are, legally they're structured as co-ops, but it costs millions of dollars to buy into one of those. So I'm really talking about the other end of the spectrum, limited equity co-ops. I work at Champlain Housing Trust, and we work with 5 housing cooperatives in the Burlington area. We are a nonprofit organization that creates and supports affordable housing. So these are affordable housing co-ops, and that's really what I can speak to. We also have folks here who work with mobile home cooperatives, which I don't think are formally designated as affordable, but that's really their function in our community. So I think that the things that I want to pull out about the housing cooperatives are, housing co-ops are consumer co-ops, right? I mean, you've heard this distinction that Molly made. There are producer co-ops, there are consumer co-ops, there are worker co-ops. Housing co-ops are consumer co-ops, meaning, people are buying into the business in order to consume what it's offering. But it's almost a misnomer, I think, because housing is such a fundamental, not a misnomer, but it doesn't really capture what they mean to people. Because housing is such a fundamental part of our lives and our basic sense of security, right? So I just want to pull that out because the co-ops that I work with, they're small. The largest one is 28 apartments. The smallest one is 3 apartments. The people who are approved to join those co-ops and who buy into them have a requirement to really participate very actively in managing the property. So it's a very particular experience, as this gentleman back here was saying. people move in because they want the housing. They're definitely motivated by the affordability. We hope that they're also motivated by the sense of community and participation and the cooperative values. Once they're there, I mean, they really are learning different aspects of running a business. It's not necessarily, you don't necessarily go out looking for housing that's going to give you that. But that becomes, I think, a pretty important part of the experience for members of the community. So the economic benefit that people are getting from the fact that it's the co-op model is really the autonomy, the control that they have over costs. They set the budget. I mean, they still have to pay the bills like everyone else, right? But they set their budgets, and they manage their budgets very, very tightly, very closely. There is some work that members can do themselves and save money. Occasionally there's work that they do themselves and end up costing more money. I think homeowners have that experience too. So it's not always a simple issue. And then because the members are very aware of the expenses, they tend to watch the property very closely and really manage it pretty well in terms of not letting things kind of slide into chaos. Members, that's how they're seeing the benefit. They're not getting a check. They're essentially keeping their costs down. But I think that there are also the intangible benefits are the ones that I have seen over time in working with folks because, I think the qualities of autonomy, security, both security of tenure because there isn't a private landlord who could arbitrarily decide to just not renew your lease, right? That doesn't exist. People have a perpetual lease as long as they comply with the policies of the co-op. But also security in the aspect of community that people mentioned. Right? The fact that the members are doing real work together means that they really build relationships as well. They're not all pals, right? But they really know each other and they have a level of trust that I think people really value highly in our co-ops. So those are qualities that people mention to me about why they keep living there, why they value that. And then the impact that has on the community is really that the co-ops provide the kind of stability, the kind of member investment in the community that I think in our society we associate with individual homeownership, So most of us are aware of just this sort of rent or own, and, I think in a lot of political circles and economic circles, sometimes renters are seen as, it's kind of a second-class category almost. There's a certain amount of, assumption that should be transitory, you should be working toward homeownership. There's a lot of judgments that can be attached to that. And one of the beautiful things about housing cooperatives is that people have the opportunity to have the qualities of ownership without having to make the financial investment. Now, obviously, some people want to make a financial investment with capacity, and that's great. But if you don't have the capacity or you don't have that desire to own something and be tied to it in that way, the housing cooperative is a great alternative. So I think, there are these sort of qualitative and more tough to measure benefits to our community that I'm very aware of. And I think the folks who work with the mobile home co-ops would be able to talk about that as well.
You can call us out.
Sean and Sarah. But they can. I mean, if people have questions about that, there are 3 mobile home communities that incorporated as co-ops within the past 3 years, and another one that seems set to do that in the coming year. So I think that we're sort of seeing that in more rural parts of the state, where people also are recognizing just the power of having that control over where they live.